What's the best advice you've ever got throughout your career? It could be personal or professional.
The best advice I ever got was something that actually a good friend of mine said, and we were talking personally, but it also makes sense professionally. And she said, "You are the prize." And what that meant was that, for someone who is very critical of themselves, as many leaders are, for someone who, has aspirations to be a leader, remember that there's value in everything that you know, everything that you've done, everything that you can do. There's value to it. And I think I've certainly had a history of undervaluing myself. And so it's a perspective that I have carried with me, is just to put a little bit more weight behind what I know I can do, and to be a little bit bolder about that. And that's been essential, of course, over the last number of months, moving into an independent consultant role. You certainly need to be confident in what you bring to the table. While of course it's always work in progress, that's been an incredible piece of advice that really, I think, helped me reframe a bit of how I look at myself as a leader.
That's a great friend.
Very good friend, yes.
Yeah. So what would you say is the biggest risk then you've taken? Would it be jumping into the independent consult? Yeah.
Well, that's hard to say, I suppose. I suspect, yes, that I'll look back in 5 years and recognize this as a very pivotal point. Obviously, jumping into the unknown of working independently is a risk. That being said, the worst case scenario is I go find a day job. So I suppose the risk isn't that great. But I think as a leader, then perhaps the biggest risk was initially just jumping into it. I mean, I certainly could have wrote out my time as a clinician and put in the 25 years and nice benefits and pension and all that kind of stuff. But I guess jumping into that first leadership role really naively was a risk that has of course paid dividends. But there's risks at every point along the leadership process, and I think because if you're honest with yourself, as a leader, you probably never think you have it completely figured out. It's like every step, every new thing feels risky if you're questioning your foundation, right? So there's risks every week that came with new situations, solving new problems, and it kind of all felt a little bit risky in many ways. Especially for me, considering I think the rapid nature in which I moved into a leadership position. So everything felt a little bit tenuous and risky. But I think risk can be your friend too. I often say that when I'm making decisions, in particular career decisions, but other life decisions as well, when I know I'm moving in the right direction, I kind of liken it to standing on the edge of a cliff, and that simultaneous feeling of thrill and excitement and pure terror. And if I find myself there, I can look back along my journey and say that those are the times that I've made decisions that have really positively impacted my life. And so if you feel that simultaneous sense of excitement and thrill and sheer terror, it probably means you're moving in the right direction.
What's something you're really proud of accomplishing?
There's a number of things. One thing in particular, I think that probably rings true, and it was about 5 years ago now. No, sorry, call it 4 years ago now. I was at the Canadian Mental Health Association, that first leadership role of mine, and I'm really proud, before leaving that organization, establishing a new initiative called Recovery College. And it's an evidence-based practice that comes out of the UK, and they've been interested in it in Canada. And during my time at CMHA here in Manitoba, I was able actually to establish the first community-based recovery college in Canada. And I think what made it so meaningful was that it was in a tiny community here in Manitoba of probably 20,000 people. And little old Portage La Prairie was a first within the country and within the Canadian Mental Health Association, and it's now, I think, become a modality of service delivery that many CMHAs across Canada are embracing. That's something that I'm incredibly proud of, but not just the fact that it was established and it's now spreading, but I think proud of the impact it had on the people that we were serving. Again, a group of fairly marginalized people with mental health conditions and really gave them something that became theirs to own. And I saw the way it changed their perspective. It changed their relationship with our organization as well in really positive and beneficial ways. And so suddenly, this place that they came for service that had a little bit of stigma attached to it, and they felt it too. Suddenly they were in charge of reinventing it and making it into something that was accessible to everyone in the community. And they were such an integral part of it. Being people with lived experience, part of Recovery College model means incorporating that lived experience into all of the education and teaching that goes on within the program. So I'd say that's another reason I was very proud of it, in particular because I could see the impact it had on the individuals we were serving and the way it changed their views of the organization, but also I think to some degree of themselves, because they saw their value.
Yeah, that's a great example, and it's also such a nice example of including your customers or your clients, while you're planning a program that's for them. Because often I find in healthcare, we're getting better now by including the patients and families, but we've come a long way from trying.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the same goes in the mental health field, obviously. There's a long legacy of experts telling patients what to do, in some ways to their detriment. So I'm super pleased in the way mental health services are evolving to be more inclusive and to be designed in collaboration with the people that they're intended to serve. And of course, glad to see it across other healthcare settings as well.
If you could redo life, Jordan, is there anything you would change about your journey?
Man, well, that's not a question I often ask myself. I prefer to sort of live and let lie and be future focused. One thing, if I could change one thing, I think it would be perhaps that I was a little bit bolder in terms of pursuing my leadership ambitions. I think, of course, it's been a very quick ride into leadership for me, but I think there was always some hesitation, and if I could go back and not necessarily change the circumstances, maybe just tweak my own mindset and be a little bit bolder and to understand that it's all going to be okay. I think that certainly would have been helpful.
Yeah, and how do you think someone might be able to do that?
Sorry, to tweak their own mindset to know it's going to be okay.
Yeah, to take that leap
it's talking to other leaders, and admittedly, I hadn't talked to a whole lot prior to jumping into a leadership role myself, and I think if I'd have done that, I probably would have done it sooner, and B, would have felt a lot more confident in it, because you talk to any leader and you ask them if they've got it figured out, and we'll all say unequivocally no. And so having that reassurance earlier on in my days as a leader would have been helpful. So, I guess for any aspiring leader out there, have those candid conversations with leaders that and that you trust. And I think you'll quickly find that despite appearing like they've got it all figured out, they probably don't. And if they're willing to say that to you, I would say it's also a good sign that they're a leader that you should pay some attention to.
Right. I'm glad you said that, because, in my own work, I get to work with some inspirational leaders who are at the top of their game. But, at the end of the day, it's like, we're all human. We always have that sort of that negative talk going on. And how do we deal with it in the best way possible to move us forward?
And I have a colleague, she's got a great quote when she's talking about, reframing that. And especially for leaders, we're often great of ourselves, but we need to be the critic of our inner critic.
Right.
So that's what I often remind myself of. I need to be the critic of my inner critic.
Right.